Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. Today we have the 2017 CRKT Hi Jinx. That's opposed to, of course, the 2014 CRKT Hi Jinx. That was a high-end titanium frame lock. That knife was designed by Ken Onion, which this one is as well, but built by Lion Steel for CRKT. And back then it was a very well-received design. It actually won Knife of the Year at Blade Show that year. And it's a pretty cool design. So it's kind of nice to see CRKT bring this bring this out as a budget offering so that pretty much anyone who likes the design can get their hands on one. Let's go ahead and start off with size and weight. Talk about how comfortable this is to carry. The previous one was quite a brick. It was pretty heavy for its size. This one's a little heavy for its size, but nothing like the original. So 8 inches overall, 3¼ inch blade, and that's measured, by the way, from right here. So you can see how the cutting edge extends beyond the handle a little bit, giving you 3½ inches of cutting edge, even though the measured blade length is only 3¼ 4¾ inch handle here, and the weight on this, as I was mentioning before, is not uncomfortable or really worth complaining about, but it's 4.87 ounces, which is a little heavy for an 8-inch knife, but certainly not the end of the world. And the reason it weighs that much is you can see full backspacer back here as you're looking through, and those full stainless steel liners completely unmilled in any way, which is adding a little bit of weight to this design. As I say, not the end of the world. And actually, if you want to know how this knife carries, is it comfortable in pocket? Yes, very comfortable. This is a very easy knife to carry. Works well in pretty much any attire that you might be wearing that day, with the exception of maybe, a light pair of running shorts or something, where, yeah, then it would probably be too heavy and, swing around like a brick in your pocket. So let's move on to the blade. This blade is a fairly Ken Onion-y blade, sort of a drop point style, with lots of belly, flat grind. I wouldn't call this a high flat grind, more of a medium flat grind. It is nice and thin behind the edge, which I do like. You got a bit of a swedge here on the top, and then a bit of flat portion here, which is nice for your thumb so that you don't end up, I've complained about this before, where they carry this swedge back too far, and then you end up with, almost a sharpened portion where you're supposed to put your thumb, which doesn't work well. So overall, I think the blade shape is really nice. It's a very attractive blade shape. Certainly good for utility tasks, slices really well. The point is fine enough for any kind of detailed sort of cutting, carving tasks, opening packages and all that. The blade steel on this is 1.116, I should say, stainless steel. And that's a steel that is not stellar, okay? It's not terrible, and in my use, I went ahead and went for, a good 2-3 weeks without sharpening this on purpose. I didn't strop it, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to see how it would hold up to the average person's use. And I will say, I wasn't all that disappointed. I found that at the end of 3 weeks, it still had a workable edge. Now, for me, I'm a bit of an edge snob, and I would have sharpened it sooner, but I just wanted to kind of test, if you really let this go, how long is it going to keep cutting for you? And after 3 weeks, close to a month, it was still fine. It was a workable edge, as I say. It wasn't razor sharp anymore, but when you do want to put an edge back on this steel, it's going to go ahead and take one pretty nicely. This is certainly comparable to other budget steels, right? If you're familiar with AUS 8, if you're familiar with 8CR13 or 420HC, all of these are kind of going to be in the same ballpark. And I wouldn't actually say that this is worse than all of those, okay? I think 8CR13 is maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit harder, but then you are making a trade-off. In my experience anyway, 8CR13 can be a little bit chippy. So, these are all budget steels, and again, they're going to be adequate at best, right? And if you need something more, then you might want to step up to a slightly more expensive knife that's going to have some better steel in it for you. Lockup and deployment on this guy, it does have the IKBS, which you can see there. It flips pretty nicely. I've got a couple little complaints here. It's not the nicest or easiest flipper. I have to be a little intentional about it. It will drop closed under its own weight, which is not bad considering it's a fairly lightweight blade. A couple little complaints I do have though. First off is, let's see if I can fail for you. If I'm not pretty intentional, yeah, see, it didn't quite lock up there. And that was just me being a little bit casual about my flip. Okay, if I don't put a little bit of effort into it, it can fail to deploy. So it's not just this silky smooth, you know, frictionless flip that we've seen on, you know, for example, the CRKT Fossil was just amazing and had just outstanding action, and it was IKBS as well. This one's not quite to that level, but certainly it works well. The lock is pretty easily accessible, but it does to a pretty severe extent. Let's see if I can demonstrate this for you. Sorry about that, I messed it up that time. There you go. So right there, you can see the detent ball is hitting the lock bar, and it hits it pretty hard. So what I often find myself doing is making sure that I'm really pushing this knife down far enough to get past that detent ball before trying to close the knife the rest of the way. Otherwise, the action is pretty good. The lockup is nice and solid. There's no blade play, which is certainly appreciated. Again, you know, on a knife of this price point, you know, could they have, you know, tightened things up a little bit and gone with phosphor bronze washers instead of bearings? I think they could have. And in some ways on a knife like this, I kind of prefer it because it's sort of a, you know, this is going to bounce around in somebody's pocket for a long time, and it does open itself to get a little gunk and crap into those washers. Not that they're hard to clean out or anything, but it does open itself up to that, okay? The tab as well, maybe one quick note about that. The flipper tab is, whoops. The flipper tab is okay, but it's certainly not the most comfortable or best done flipper tab that I've ever felt. And I would say the detent that you're seeing, essentially what you're seeing is when I fail to deploy the knife there, you're seeing a detent that's just a little bit too soft, okay? Not overly soft, but just a little. Let's see, so that's lockup and deployment. Everything functions. I really can't, I'm not gonna, you know, just complain bitterly about this because it's totally fine. It's just not amazing. All right, let's move on to the handle itself. Now the handle is glass reinforced nylon, or GRN, you may have heard it called. Essentially it's just a reinforced polymer, okay, like you'd see in all kinds of things that are built out of tough plastic, right? It certainly works. I like the fact, there are a couple things that I want to point out that I do like right away. I like the decorative pivot. I like the fact that they retained the indentation here. So the original had this sort of cupped out indentation, and it actually does seem to add something to the ergonomics of the knife. I also like the way that they included a little filler tab over here when you have the pocket clip on this side. And of course, if you had them the opposite, you'd reverse that. So I like that. That's a nice little touch. And I do like that they nested the stainless steel liners. Now, would I have preferred a different material? Absolutely. I would have liked to see this. In fact, I think this design is nice enough that it warrants something a little better than what's here. So I would have liked to see this in, you know, G10 and maybe a nicer steel. I think the design warrants that, but as it stands, it's certainly functional. By the way, the jimping is good. There's a bit of jimping here where you can rest your thumb. There's a bit more back here on the back spacer, and it certainly functions fine. It would have been nice to have a little bit on the blade. Now the other thing is, most of the time in my cutting use, I don't put my thumb here at all. I actually put it up here, so that jimping ends up doing me no good. Not sure how that'll work with your hands. If you have smaller hands, I think that little sort of thumb indentation right here on the back would work well for you. For me, I have to kind of back off on the handle to get my thumb there, and now I'm sort of further away from the work that I'm cutting on. So I'd rather be up here, and that's how I've always used the knife. It is comfortable in hand. It is grippy enough. I could stand it to be a little more highly textured, but again, it's one of those things where it's not bad, it's just not amazing, okay? So, oh yeah, one last point about the handle before we move on. I would have liked, two more points, sorry. I would have liked to see this in standoff construction instead of a backspacer. And let me praise one thing that they've done really, really well. This pocket clip is excellent. It really, really is well done. It's a bent over clip, but it's recessed in, so that makes it so that the back of the clip and the screws kind of stay out of the way when you're pocketing this knife. It goes in and out of pocket really, really well. The other thing is it's small, okay? So this is not a huge clip. If you look at, you know, something like this, look at the size of the Para 2 clip compared to this little guy. So nice and sort of sized down to become a little less noticeable. And I've got to say, I do appreciate that for sure. So the clip is really well done on this knife. All right, let's get some comparisons and then we'll give sort of an overall impression here. I do have a couple of other budget knives. The first one that I pretty much always bring in because it's a standard is the Rat Model 1. This, of course, is the D2. This knife, it really wrecks everybody else's day. It truly does, because it's such a well done knife, well constructed in great steel. And the price point, you know, these are, I think, around 36 bucks right now. On KnifeWorks or Knife Center. I'm not sure where I saw them last for that price, but 36 bucks for this knife is really, really good. Now, this knife I think is about 32 or 34, so it's a little bit cheaper, but for like $4 more to get D2 steel is a huge step up, okay? So this knife does, you know, kind of become a standard for budget folding knives. What else have we got here? Another standard for budget folding knives is the Real Steel H6. Again, this is a budget. Now this is G10 with liner lock construction, 14C28N. This knife's going to be a little more than this guy. I don't know, maybe $10 more. Let's say it's $45, okay? But for that extra 10 bucks, you're getting quite a big step up in materials with G10 versus FRN and 14C28N instead of the 1.4116 stainless, all right? But again, very comparable. This knife is a little heavier as well. That's one of the sort of complaints I have about it. I don't have right now a Tenacious in my collection, probably won't again, but I do have a Polestar. This is not really in the same price category as this, but I wanted to bring this in because, you know, something like the Bird Raven or the Bird Caracara, or something like the Spyderco Tenacious or Ambitious or Resilience would all compete pretty well against this. Really, I don't know what the design of this I think is a little more compelling, a little more interesting than those knives, even maybe than this knife. The materials and fit and finish on this knife are certainly a step up, but this is a $60 knife, so not really comparable, but I just brought that in to sort of talk about some of those budget Spydercos. For those of you who are Para 2 fans and compare everything to a Para 2, I'm with you on that. So here's a Para 2. You can see just for size comparison how that goes. And let me bring in a knife that is not really comparable, but I do really like, okay? So I'm bringing this in because they've done a lot of things really, really right, and these guys cost about the same. So here we have G10, we have 8CR13 MOV. This, of course, is a stainless steel frame lock. This actually could have been one. It was originally a frame lock design. Here, though, is a knife that is really, really nicely pulled off. It's doing a few things really well, especially the ergonomics, okay? This knife is comfortable, and I don't have any complaints about the ergonomics. This knife just locks into your hand. It feels so good. So this is a bit of a step up from the Hi Jinx, although, let's be honest, this is going to be too heavy for a lot of people to want to carry on a daily basis. So there you go. Those are some comparisons for you that you might want to consider. The reality is this portion of the video, guys, there's literally hundreds of comparisons that I could go through. So I just kind of take a bit of a smattering, and the main one that I always bring in is the Rat 1. So those are some competitors or some comparisons for you. Let me give you my overall take on this knife, okay? It's a nice design. It really is. A nice looking knife, fairly comfortable in hand, and the way they have carried it off here with the FRN and the budget steel liner lock is absolutely functional, okay? There's nothing about this that doesn't do what it's supposed to do. There's nothing at the price point that I can really hit this knife on. So what I would say is, for its price point, it's a good knife, okay? There's nothing about it, well, there's nothing I can specifically criticize. There's also nothing that makes me say, wow, this is just wonderful. Okay, and there are some budget knives that really make me do that. And so I would say about this knife, if you like the design and if you're looking for sort of a comfortable, moderately weighted EDC knife with a lot of belly, yeah, this is a great option. You know, it's a flipper, it's got IKBS, it's based on a pretty cool design. So maybe you just love that Hi Jinx design and weren't able to get one, and so this is now your chance. For all those reasons, I think this is a really great knife. I am certainly glad that CRKT did this in a budget version so that the design can kind of stick around. it would be nice to see this stepped up just a little. I'd like to see G10 here. I'd like to see a bit of a nicer steel and some tighter tolerances and standoff construction, because it is a good design and I think it would do well. This is almost going too budget friendly, if that makes sense. You know, I would have paid $45 for this or $50 to have some nicer materials involved. So there you go, guys. That's my take on the CRKT Hi Jinx. Again, certainly a functional knife. I have no big complaints about it, and I certainly wouldn't try to talk someone out of buying it. But if I wouldn't also try to talk someone into buying it if it wasn't their thing. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video. We will talk to you soon.